In 2020, the Federal Reserve created $4 trillion in 8 weeks. That's more money than existed in the entire U.S. economy in 1960. In 2021, Congress mailed checks to millionaires who never missed a paycheck. In 2022, we kicked Russia out of the global payment system for invading Ukraine. In 2023, China and Brazil started trading oil without using dollars. In 2024, central banks bought more gold than any year since World War II. And right now, in early 2026, the 10-year Treasury yield is screaming danger. So here's my question. When does a recession stop being the thing you should worry about? Look, I manage six figures in investments. I'm not selling you panic or some course on surviving the apocalypse. I'm here because I spent 3 months reading documents most people will never open. SEC filings from Bridgewater, IMF papers on reserve currency collapse. Bank for International Settlements reports that literally nobody reads. And what I found is this. We're not heading into a recession. We're heading into something structurally different. A change in the rules of money itself. And your 401k was built for a game that's ending. In the next 12 minutes, I'm going to show you the actual mechanics of how monetary systems die. Why every warning signal is flashing red right now. And what this means if you're planning to retire in the next 20 years. Because here's the thing. The psychology of money isn't about picking stocks. It's about understanding which game you're playing. And right now, most people are still playing checkers while the board is being swapped out for chess. Let me explain how monetary systems actually work using a metaphor. Think of the global financial system like a massive commercial lease. After World War II, the world signed a lease with the United States. The terms were simple. The dollar would be the global reserve currency. Everyone would trade oil, goods, and debt in dollars. In exchange, the U.S. would maintain a stable currency and provide military security. That lease has been running for 80 years. But here's the problem with long leases. The landlord starts taking liberties, and the tenants start looking for other apartments. The first liberty the U.S. took was in 1971. Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar stopped being backed by anything except trust. And for a while, trust was enough. The U.S. had the biggest economy, the strongest military, and everyone needed dollars to buy oil. But trust is a psychological asset, and psychological assets decay when you abuse them. Let's talk about abuse. The U.S. national debt is now $36 trillion. That's 120% of GDP. To put that in perspective, if you made $60,000 a year but owed $72,000 on credit cards, your debt-to-income ratio would be the same as the United States government. Now you might think, okay, but we've had high debt before. True. After World War II, debt to GDP hit 106%. But here's what's different. Back then, the U.S. had a young population building things. Now we have an aging population and offshored manufacturing. Back then, the world owed us money. Now we borrow money to pay interest on money we already borrowed. That's not a debt problem. That's a Ponzi scheme. And here's where the psychology gets interesting. When you're running a Ponzi scheme, you have two options. Admit it's a Ponzi scheme and restructure, or keep it going by finding new buyers. For the last 15 years, the Federal Reserve has been the buyer of last resort. Every time Treasury yields spiked, the Fed stepped in and printed money to buy bonds. That's called monetizing the debt. It's also called inflation. But that trick only works if the rest of the world still needs dollars. And this is where it gets really interesting. Ray Dalio calls this the big cycle of internal order and disorder. Basically, when wealth inequality gets extreme, societies fracture. In 2024, the top 1% held 32% of all wealth. The bottom 50% held 2%. That gap is wider than it was in 1929, right before the Great Depression. Inequality alone doesn't break a system, but it creates the conditions for political instability. And political instability makes people nervous about holding long-term government debt. So, what do you do instead? You buy gold. You buy real assets. You move money into currencies that aren't tied to a politically unstable system. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Central banks bought over 1,000 tons of gold in 2024. China, Russia, India, Turkey. They're not buying gold because they think it's pretty. They're buying it because they're quietly exiting the dollar lease. Now you might be thinking, people have predicted the death of the dollar for decades. Fair point. But here's what's different this time: geopolitical conflict. We're seeing the most significant realignment of global power since the Cold War. Russia invaded Ukraine and got kicked out of SWIFT. That was supposed to cripple them. Instead, Russia started settling trade with China in yuan and rubles. China and Brazil cut a deal to trade in their own currencies. India is buying Russian oil with rupees. The Gulf states are now talking openly about pricing oil in multiple currencies. This isn't theory. This is happening right now. When you weaponize the dollar, you teach the world to build a system that doesn't need the dollar. That's not conspiracy. That's incentives. If I can lock you out of the payment system because I don't like your foreign policy, you're going to build an alternative payment system. It's the same psychology as a bank run. The bank doesn't fail because it's insolvent. It fails because people think it might be. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Now let's get concrete. Meet David. He's 42. He's got 350,000 in his 401k. He makes 110,000 a year. He's contributing 6%. His employer matches 3. According to every calculator, he's on track to retire at 65 with 1.8 million. Sounds great, right? Except that math assumes 3 things: 7% average annual returns, 2.5% inflation, and the dollar in 2049 buys roughly what it buys today. Here's the problem: if we're entering a monetary transition, all 3 assumptions break. Let's say the government, facing a debt crisis and unable to find buyers for treasuries, decides to let inflation run hot to erode the real value of its debt. That's not speculation. That's what every country in history has done when it couldn't pay its bills. If inflation averages 5% instead of 2.5 over the next 23 years, David's 1.8 million in retirement only buys what 800,000 buys today. He just lost $1 million of purchasing power and doesn't even know it yet. His statement still says 1.8 million, but the game changed underneath him, and it gets worse. If the dollar loses reserve currency status, even partially, U.S. interest rates have to go up to attract buyers for government debt. Higher interest rates mean lower stock valuations. The S&P 500 is priced for a world where the U.S. can borrow cheaply forever. If that assumption breaks, we're not talking about a 10% correction. We're talking about a repricing of every financial asset in dollar terms. David's target date fund, which automatically shifts to bonds as he gets older, would get destroyed. Bonds lose value when interest rates rise. That's not a prediction. That's math. Now, to be fair, this doesn't happen overnight. Monetary transitions take years, sometimes decades. But here's the thing about slow-moving disasters: people don't adjust until it's too late. It's the same psychology as climate change or smoking. You know it's bad, but it's not bad today, so you don't change anything. And then one day it's bad and you can't undo 20 years of compounding mistakes. So what does the US do? It has two options. Option one, fix the underlying problems. But that requires political will. And in a democracy where officials optimize for the next election cycle, not the next generation, that's not happening. So option two, change the rules of the game. There's a real possibility the US moves to a commodity-backed currency. Not a full gold standard, but something like issuing treasury bonds backed by gold reserves. The US supposedly has 8,000 tons of gold in Fort Knox. At current prices, that's worth about $630 billion, which sounds like a lot until you realize the national debt is $36 trillion. You'd need to revalue gold at over $47,000 an ounce. And if the US doesn't actually have the gold it claims, which has never been meaningfully audited, the whole plan falls apart. Or maybe the US pivots to a digital reserve system. Bitcoin is already being hoarded by nation-states. The US reportedly holds over 200,000 Bitcoin seized from criminals. If the US announced a strategic Bitcoin reserve and started issuing bonds backed by it, that would legitimize crypto overnight. But here's the problem with all these solutions. They require coordination. After World War II, the US could dictate terms because Europe was in ruins. Now China has the second largest economy. The EU is a massive trade bloc. India is rising. These players have options. And if they don't like the new rules, they'll just build their own system. Which brings us back to the lease metaphor. When the lease is up, the tenants don't have to renew. Here are three things I'm personally doing about this. First, I'm diversifying out of purely dollar-denominated assets. That doesn't mean selling all my stocks. It means holding some gold, some real assets, and yes, a small Bitcoin position. Not because Bitcoin is definitely the future, but because if there's even a 10% chance it becomes part of the reserve system, the upside is asymmetric. Second, I'm shortening duration on fixed income. Long-term bonds are a terrible bet right now. If rates go up, you lose. If inflation stays high, you lose. I'd rather hold short-term treasuries or cash and wait for clarity. Third, I'm investing in skills and businesses that aren't denominated in any currency. The value of what you can do doesn't change just because the monetary system does. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the US figures this out. But the data says otherwise. And I'd rather be early than late. Here's what people don't understand about monetary transitions. They think it's this dramatic event. One day the dollar is worthless and we're using gold coins. That's not how it works. It's a slow grind. It's your grocery bill going up 5% a year instead of 2. It's your bond fund underperforming year after year. It's the slow realization that the retirement you planned for isn't the retirement you're getting. And by the time you realize it, you've lost a decade of compounding you can't get back. Ray Dalio has been screaming about this for 5 years. Bridgewater Associates manages over $100 billion. These guys don't make bets based on vibes. They model this using data from the last 500 years of empire cycles. And every model says the US is past its peak and entering the decline phase. That doesn't mean collapse, it means transition. And transitions are messy. The cruel irony is that the people who get hurt worst are the ones who did everything right. Saved money, maxed out the 401k, bought index funds, believed the system would reward patience and discipline, and it did for 80 years. But the system is changing, and if you don't change with it, you're going to wake up at 65 with a number on a screen that doesn't buy what you thought it would. The game isn't about being smart. It's about understanding which game you're playing and when the rules change. Most people are still playing the game from 1985. Low inflation, stable dollar, bonds as safe haven, stocks go up over time. That game is over. The new game has different rules, and we're all figuring them out in real time. The lease is up, the tenants are moving out. And if you're still sitting in the apartment assuming everything will be fine, you're going to be the last one holding the bag when the landlord turns off the utilities. This is its money fables. Don't get caught playing yesterday's game.